Hello, everyone, once again, and welcome back to our newest episode of Memoirs of the Father. I am still editing the last video while I'm recording this one because everything's fresh on my mind. So, this will be the second installment of our mini series within the podcast, The Dark Side of Cheer, where I'm going to look at some of the negative things that go on in cheerleading and try to give an explanation or an elaboration on some of these things. The previous episode that I did recorded was over a sport. If we are a sport, we examined a lawsuit from, I believe it was Connecticut. It was about 15 years ago. And if you got to check out that episode, kind of looking into why they said we weren't a sport and if we've done anything to get closer to that definition and what the implications are of if we did get recognized as a sport or what changes would potentially have to take place and just I'm sure it wasn't like the gospel on it or anything, but it was just me pitching ideas and pitching thoughts that I have in my head. So this will be the second installment. I'm not exactly sure how many that there's going to be. There was a wide variety of topics that I wanted to discuss, and this was one that I didn't initially have in, but now I feel the need to do this one. And we're going to look at some bad coaching and what are the characteristics of a bad coach? What are some things that coaches do that are bad, and when are we misperceiving those things? And you have to remember, coaches are human beings too. We can make mistakes. We're not the know all end all. We're not the gospel on how to live your life or how to do cheerleading or any of that stuff. And you have to remember that we're all new too. And that anytime that we're interacting with individuals, sometimes it's our first time. Sometimes there's new situations pop up all the time. Sometimes we get in situations where we don't know what to do either because we've never been in those situations before. We're all going through this together, and you just have to be rational and reasonable and work it out, and you'll make the best out of what you got. But there are bad coaches out there, and there are some coaches that probably should never have been hired to begin with. I don't know how they got that job, and if anybody knew what they were doing, they wouldn't have their job. And we know all that stuff is real. We know it exists. There's tons of people, and that's pretty much been my motivation for this. Is that I see tons of posts online about coaches that ruin their passion and all kinds of stuff. Bad coaches are doing this and that. And sometimes it's just an individual, that they didn't like the way things worked out for them. And sometimes there's very real and legitimate claims to these things. Um, each case is different. There's not a one size fits all to that. But like I said, I do want to look at some of the characteristics of what a bad coach is, what a bad coach does, and I'm sure that I won't cover everything. There's probably some really wild stories out there that I will have no understanding of or couldn't comprehend how someone could get there or get to that place. But as someone who's learned a lot about being a coach while being a coach and things that I had to change and things that I saw other people do that I did not want to do, I think I'm going to add an interesting dynamic to this. I've been fortunate enough to be a head coach. I've been an assistant coach in a number of different places. Of course, I was an athlete as well, a judge, choreographer, all that stuff. I've done so many different things. And I think that all those things lend into me being better at being coaching. And I think that my relationship and my interaction and a lot of other things that we're going to talk about, your communication, being concerned about your athlete's well-being, being transparency, and that's a part of communication, but it's not always that simple. And like I said, we're gonna deep dive into a lot of different stuff here on this one. I think this is going to be a really good and a really fun episode, and something that a lot of people will look forward to and want to hear about, because everybody's got a story about a bad coach. So some people may be getting ready to revamp some memories and dig up some old bones and get hot again over this, and some people may just want to hear, hey, maybe I have a bad coach, maybe I don't, maybe I'm gonna be able to see this from their perspective. You know, always be open to anything. So, but we won't take too much longer. We're gonna start deep diving into bad coaching on Memoirs of the Father. So the first area that we're going to cover is probably one of the more prominent ones, and that is your communication area. Communication is super essential to being a head coach, to being an assistant coach, to being a coach of anything. It's actually essential in pretty much everything that you do in your life. Communication is the key. There are, I guess the way to break this down is the types of communication, and it can be the feedback that you give people. And this is where we're going to start. You have to be pretty precise with some of the things that you say, especially in cheerleading. For instance, a bad coach will give pretty heavy negative feedback and not positive, constructive criticism. And there is a difference. I've seen the video from that All-Star cheer show, or I don't know if it's a YouTube show or something, where they're like yelling because of this girl, because she's not smiling, because she doesn't stand up, and it's a whole mess. And they're just trashing the girl, right there. And I hate that video, but they come back and they just tell this girl, "This is your fault. This is your fault." Well, obviously she knows she made a mistake because she was on the ground. You don't have to hammer that stuff in. You have to give good constructive feedback. We go back to one of these lies that I've heard is, you can be replaced. That's a blanketed statement because there's no context, there's no explanation, there's no transparency in what you just said. You can be replaced. If what? If you don't do this skill, if you don't do that skill. And, an athlete's worth is not what they can do on the mat. You're more than that. You can replace skills all day long. If you can't do a standing tuck and I've got someone who will, I can replace that standing tuck. I'd have to take you off the mat to do it, but I will do it. That's different. Because that's me saying, hey, there's someone who's contributing more to our team and is going to be able to do, it's a tough conversation, but it's very crystal clear. You would understand, hey, this person's going to get this spot over me because they can do everything that I can and the one thing that I can't. It's transparent. You may not like it, but it's easy to understand. It's digestible. Versus when you just say, hey, we're going to lose if you can't do this. Hey, we're going to do this if you can't do this. Hey, we're going to fail. Keep doing it this way. We're going to, there's nothing. It's just the negativity aspect. Just you made a mistake. That's all that it is. Just you suck. Just you're going to lose. Just you're going to fail. Just the negativity. And you cannot be that way all the time. You don't need to be that way any of the time, really. I mean, don't be wrong. If someone's needs to get it in gear and you think that it's more of a in their head problem than a skill problem and they just need a pep talk, you can do that and you can be honest with people. You don't have to be mean about it. It still may be a tough conversation and unpleasant things may have to be said and some truths may have to be revealed that, hey, you're lazy. You're being lazy. It sounds like a horrible conversation to have. And it's not one that I want to have. But if the athlete's being lazy, then they're being lazy. It's not wrong if it's honest, but it's all about how you say it, especially to kids, because kids are always going to go, if you're not transparent with them or all that they're going to see is negativity, people can be like a mirror, especially when they're young. They're going to be a reflection of whatever is cast in front of them. And if you're negative all the time, then they're going to be negative all the time. If you tell them that they suck all the time, then they're going to think that they suck all the time. Athletes, especially, like I said, I've said this numerous times, cheerleaders have some of the worst mental health because of all the stuff. Like I said, this is a subjective sport. It's based on opinion. And if their coaches are consistently presenting to them a negative opinion, then that's the form that they're going to take on too. They will be negative about themselves. They will be less understanding about anything that anybody else does. And they're going to have a negative impact and view on the way that they look at themselves. And I'm sure there's a ton of people that can sit here and they just heard what I said and they completely get that. Like, hey, I just need to know what's going on. Because a lot, you forget. Kids are crazy talented nowadays, but they don't know all the things that we do. And that's hard, man. Part of understanding and growing in cheerleading is that struggle and to learn. Like I said, technique is better now. You have better people to work with now than you ever have. So some of those growing pains aren't there as much, and then they manifest later on. The maturity, the understanding, the growth to go through the struggle. If that road's a little bit easier, there's always just components of that you miss and you end up having to make up later on something else. We have to be understanding with these athletes, especially ones that, have not really been in these certain situations before. It's not a one-size-fits-all for every single athlete. You have to be able to communicate with them differently and how you speak to your athletes. And, if you spend any time communicating with your athletes regularly, you'll figure out how to do that. And, Now, there are certain things that, you got to be steadfast on. You've got to stand your ground. And there has to be a certain baseline. Absolutely. These are certain sets and rules that everybody has to follow. And we're not going to deviate from that no matter what. But there has to be some flexibility around that line. I don't ever think that you should betray what you think is right at all. And I don't think that you should make exceptions for what your baseline is, but other things have got to be negotiable, or you got to be willing to take criticism or adapt, because things change. Cheerleading changes, teams evolve. The whole landscape of this industry is so much different from what it was 20 years ago. So if you try to coach like you did 20 years ago today, it's not going to be effective because everything's changed. The expectations are different, the requirements are different, the rules are different. Everything changes, and if you're not open to changing, then you will fall. And if you cannot communicate and grow through communication, then you're in trouble. Because if you're already burying your athletes all the time with the way that you're currently doing things, it's probably not going to get better when you have to change things and there's things that you don't even know to understand. You can't communicate the things that you do know. How much better are you going to be at communicating things that you don't? Sorry, I got a little hot there. The second part of that communication too is listening to your athletes. This is a big one. We make the decisions, the final decision. Everything comes down to what we choose to do ultimately. And that is a tremendous responsibility. But you have to be open to listening and getting feedback from individuals. Now, not all that stuff is going to be helpful. It may not be right. Because people are going to feel a certain way, regardless of if it's right or wrong. If it's something, especially if it's something they don't understand, there's no telling how they're going to feel. Or, if you have to take a kid out and you've got pretty good justifiable reasons and you explain all that to them, they may still think what they're going to think, regardless of how well you explain it. But you do have to be open into listening to them. Hey, I don't feel like I can do this. I don't feel safe. I don't feel comfortable. Those are things you should listen to, okay? Because you have to find a way to make them comfortable and make them understand so that can work. And you're not going to be able to do that unless you're a good communicator. But if you just sit there and force them into that, you're going to create the same negativity that I've been talking about. You're going to force them into a situation where they're going to ball up, they're going to have blocks if they don't feel comfortable. You have to find a way to bridge that gap, but you're not going to understand that if you don't communicate with them. Hey, this is too much for me. Hey, this schedule is really hard. You have to be able, because like I said, each one of these athletes is going through something different. They got certain situations. This is not like, like I said, there's certain things you've got to stand your ground on. You really, really do. But you have to go and you have to help and you have to develop the athlete at the same time. You can't just, I use the term one size fits all. That doesn't work for everybody. Some things need nails and some things need screws. People need different approaches. And that doesn't mean that you have to avoid your baseline. But sometimes it's just in the way that you communicate. It's just in the way that you listen. It's just the process that you have to go through. I coached a girl once. She would disagree with anything that I vehemently said out loud to the group. And she'd want to come and have a conversation with me. And we'd sit down. We'd have a conversation. 10, 15, 20 minutes, however long it took. And when we got done with it, she'd be like, I understand what you mean now. And that's fine. She needed that conversation to understand those things. The way that I was saying it, or she had questions and concerns that she wanted to ask. We did. We addressed them. We talked about them. And I was transparent as I could be and as honest as I needed to be. Because if I wasn't honest with her and I wasn't open and I didn't answer her questions, then she was never going to get on board with me. And it wasn't like I said, it wasn't like she was doing anything difficult. She was just concerned. And she had questions. She wanted to know. She wanted to understand. She wanted to feel comfortable. And it made her feel comfortable. It didn't take anything away from my practice. It didn't take anything away from my athletes. It didn't create any kind of negative friction. But I had to be willing to have that one-on-one conversation with her for her to feel comfortable. And if that's, 10-minute conversation with somebody, just asking questions, not being combative, they're being open, they're willing to listen, I'm going to take that 10 minutes because it's just 10 minutes. It's going to save me a whole lot of problems. But you have to be open into listening to your athletes too, because they're the ones that have to go out there and do what you're asking them to do. And, if they're not feeling comfortable, they don't think that it's realistic, then you either need to find a way to make them understand that it is, or you need to be willing to adapt. And the last thing you want to do is to find out that conversation on your own when you're too close to a competition and there's nothing you can do now, or you burn somebody out, you get somebody hurt, you get a mental block, something like, you have to be open to listen to them. Now, they're not always going to be right, and you may not be able to do anything of what they're asking you, and they could be way off the rocker, but you got to have the conversation. And if, maybe you can address the issue, maybe you can bring them back down to earth, give them some realistic expectations, whatever that's got to be. The line of communication always has to stay open. And then the last portion of this communication thing that we're going to go over is transparency. You can say a lot of things and you can be open, but you have to be pretty clear and pretty honest, and you have to communicate things in a way that they can be understood. And like I said, I don't think that you ever have to go against your baseline. And here's one example. For years when I was at McCracken, we would do semifinals, we would get the results, and then we would not tell the kids what the result was. And the reason why we didn't want to, if we ended up in first place, we didn't want them to be complacent and back off. Or if we ended up in a spot that was lower than what they thought that we should be, we didn't want them to get discouraged. And we stuck by that rule until, eventually they started posting the results online in between the rounds, and we couldn't avoid it anymore. But that was something that we chose to do. And those kids knew that we had the results, and we were transparent, like why we communicated that to them. We want to focus on the things that we know we need to do better for the next round. And that's all we want your mind to be at, is the little things. These are, stuff either the feedback we got from the judges or what we saw when we watched you guys compete. Those are things that we want to be attuned into. Not so much the placement, because we still got work to do. And that was our thing with that. So we were never transparent about that, but you have to be, pretty open about a lot of things. If this form is important to turn in, make sure they understand why it's important to turn in. Make sure they understand, like, hey, I need your forms for regionals, your waiver forms filled out, so that when we go, we can actually compete. I've got to mail these in. They've got to be done at this. I'm being transparent. I need these by this time, not negotiable. But you also have to do that way in establishing the rules for your team, establishing the conduct for your team, establishing skills. You have to be very, very transparent and very, very crystal clear. You don't want anybody to be like, oh, I didn't know, or I was blindsided, or, some people are going to say stuff like that anyway. But if you've been transparent with them in the past, then they don't have that excuse. Hey, you have to your grades are going to be checked every single Friday. So you need to make sure that your grades are good by every single Friday, because that's when the grade check. You can be failing Monday through Thursday, but you better be passing on Friday. That's being transparent, because if you're not, you're going to be ineligible, and then you can't practice till your grades are up, and it's not going to be checked again until next Friday. That was something that we had all the time in McCracken. So we're being transparent about that. Grades got to stay up, because if not, you're going to be pulled. Those are simple things. Conduct, the way that you behave on the team, you have to be transparent about all these things. It's especially important when explaining skills. I really don't ever get into how things are scored with my team. There's always people that are curious and interested, but I really don't get into that stuff all the time, because hell, I don't know what I'm going to score sometimes. But the transparency, being open, being honest. Why are we doing certain things? Why are we making these changes? If you feel that if it's not going to be harmful to your team to give them that information, then I don't see a reason why you shouldn't give them that information. If they're going to hear it and not understand it, that's fine. At least you told it to them, but that transparency, being very crystal clear about what the expectations are, no matter the circumstance, no matter the situation, whether it's personal, whether it's skill, whatever any of that is, the transparency has to be there. They have to know why they have to do it this way. They have to understand why it's important. All that stuff. The transparency is essential, and that's part of your communication. You can communicate things, but if you're not clear about them, then it doesn't really matter what you're trying to communicate. Or if you leave things open-ended, then people will fill in the blanks. And the more transparent you are, the more open, the more clear you are, the less room that is for people to come in and fill in their own idea of whatever it says that you meant. And our next area of topic is going to be the athlete well-being and motivation. So this is how I'm inspiring you. This is how I'm motivating you. Things of this nature. One area that we're going to focus on, which is going to be pretty interesting that I say this. If your sole purpose is winning, you're failing as a coach. Because when your sole purpose is winning, you will do whatever it takes to win. And you will put your athletes in compromising positions to win, or you will put them in positions that they're not ready for, because if you think that that means they need to be winning is important, and I think that it's a goal, and I think that there's some people that should absolutely strive towards it. And don't get me wrong, if you have the opportunity to win, I 100% think that you should take it, because opportunities like that are never guaranteed. But if the only thing that you're focused on is winning, you are failing your athletes. You're putting, because when's enough? When do you feel satisfied that you've done enough to win? You know, how comfortable do you have to be win? If the focus is on winning and you're valuing yourself on your success and winning, when things happen and things can go wrong, then you're going to fail. But like I said, my bigger concern is that you're going to, in pursuit of winning, if that's your sole focus, are you going to endanger your athletes to win? Because I want to say this. There's not one championship or accomplishment that I ever had that meant more to me than one of my athletes. Not one. Those individuals are the reason that I have what I have. And I couldn't do the things that I do or be seen in the way that I've seen without those athletes. I love winning. I'm happy that I've won. I'm proud of all the success that I've had. But I would not risk one of those kids for one of those rings. Ever. Accidents happen. Things happen at practice. That's part of the game. I would never push someone to a point where I felt uncomfortable about their safety in order for me to win. Because it's not worth it. Those people, the value of that individual is worth way more than whatever I'm going to get out of winning a cheerleading competition. It's not even close. I care about my athletes. I care about what I put them through. I provide myself on taking care of them and developing them, and that is the forefront of my idea. It is developing my athletes, not winning championships. I like to win. Everyone does. But if that is my sole focus, if that's all that I'm thinking about, then I'm going to push. I'm going to ask more. And it's like having tunnel vision. This is where we're going to go. And I don't care what gets wrecked on the way to get there. And that's not effective. Gaslighting, manipulation. I believe the term is emotional manipulation. When you use fear or other negative incentives to motivate someone. Oh, well, if you can't do this staying tuck, I'm just going to take you out. Or, when you tell an athlete, hey, oh my God, so-and-so's tuck is so much better than yours. When you're negative like that, when you're gaslighting them, you're trying to push them in a negative manner. You're threatening. Really, that's what it is. Because if I sit here and I say, hey, I'm going to take you out if you don't hit this stunt right here, right now, that's gaslighting. You're not good enough if you can't hit this. We don't deserve to win if you can't do this. Those things you're putting fear. And I believe in being realistic. I believe in being open. I believe in being honest. But if that's your go-to is fear and consequences, then, that's avoiding embarrassment, avoiding failure is a poor motivation. And a lot of people drive on that all the time, the negativity. I don't have any problem with addressing the responsibility of what we do. I think that that's right. I think that that's fair. I think that some of that conversation needs to happen. But if the beginning and the end is what's going to happen if you fail, then you're having the wrong conversation. You need to be positive. You need to be focused on that. Like I said, I do think you need to be realistic, but there's no way. Like I said, everything becomes a reflection. If you're negative, the team becomes negative. They are a reflection of their coach. But you can't prey on people like that. You can't. I think a lot of coaches cause insecurities because of the way that they talk to and deal with their athletes, and because of the way they handle these situations. They get so fed up, they don't want to have a conversation any other way. They think that they're right. They don't think that they can be wrong. And, whether they are or they aren't, it doesn't change the fact that you have to continue to be transparent and you have to continue to be open, and you can't let frustration, you can't let fear of failure, you can't let those things come in and impact the way that you coach and develop these individuals. Because if it becomes negative, if you become negative all the time, then they will too. And the kids don't want to live in that. They come here to do this for fun. We should too. And if it gets to the point where it's just negativity all the time, it stops being fun. And when it stops being fun, they stop wanting to be there. Oh, another one of my favorites. Favoritism. And I hear about this all the time, man. Oh, we're not so and so. We're not the favorite. We're not this and that. I wouldn't say. I don't think favoritism should play a role in what, putting together stuff. I don't think it plays a role. Do you have your favorites? I'm sure some people do. Don't be wrong. You want to know who my favorite is? The kids that don't cause me problems. Those are at the top of my list. Those are my favorites. I don't have to check your grades. You're my favorite. You show up on practice on time. You're my favorite. Thank you. You're causing me less stress. And I love that. Love that. But like, if it's a personal thing, stuff like that, there's a difference between playing favorites and recognizing your strengths. I definitely think that that's true. If I'm going to put this girl in the center and she's the best top girl and she's the sharpest and she has the best performance, I'm going to get a lot less negative feedback from that because people can look at it and be like, oh, well, I get it. That makes sense. Now, if it's Sally Sue and Sally Sue's mom is dating me and Sally Sue looks like trash, then yeah, it might look like I'm playing favoritisms. Some people get that in their head, and some people have a different dynamic with their coach. They have a different way of communicating, or they've been with them longer, or something along those lines. I definitely get how people can see that pretty often. And you always have certain people on your teams that you're leaders, that you're closer to, that you communicate with, and people look at it and they feel like they have a different dynamic, and sometimes that's just part of it. But you can play your favorites, but if they're not the cream of the crop, then it's going to show, and it's just going to hurt you, really. But like I said, as far as like favorites, and most of the time I'm just concerned with putting together what we're trying to do. It's not something that I've really encountered or really seen a lot. I mean, there's people that their coaches are really, really proud of them. Like, hey, this is have nothing but positive stuff to say. But as far as favoritism, I don't see it that often. I think you see it more in other things. I hear about it in all sports or anything like that. And don't get me wrong, it does happen. There are some people that play people for certain reasons or put people in certain positions based on things that do not particularly pertain to cheerleading. But my reaction to that is always going to be the same. If someone's in a position that they're not supposed to be in, it's going to come out. The light of day will show. And then it's probably going to happen in a competition. If you're putting the terrible girl in the center because she's your favorite, well, your scores are going to reflect that. If you're putting this girl up front in the jumps, even though she's got bad jumps because you like her, or you're moving people around because you don't like them, it will be reflected. And it will hurt the flow, the look of your routine. I promise you it's going to happen. But you can go that route if you want to. But no, you have to be able to work with anybody on your team, regardless of if you work with them. Like I said, the decision making has to be about what's best for the team, not what I like or not what I want. It's what's best for the team. And I know that's a hard thing to sometimes compromise with. But all of our decisions and our actions lead to, it's the management of the work that all these people do. And are we managing it in the correct way and in the correct direction and putting ourselves in the position to be the best team that we can be? Or are we putting Sally Sue in the position to be the best Sally Sue she can be? It can't be that way. It's got to be the team. The last one under the athlete well-being and motivation is the neglect. And I want to use this. If you have someone in your team that you don't care for, you don't want to work with, why are they on your team? First of all, neglect gets brought up a lot. Like, hey, this coach is not working with me, or this not it. Especially around this time of year when you start having people shift over to alternates. Alternates do feel neglected. And to be honest with you, sometimes they very much do. And, we would always have to have a conversation with those people and be like, hey, listen, we understand this is going to be a little rough. You're not going to be the primary focus. We're working on this. you're kind of going to get opportunities. You're going to get thrown every way. It's not that we want to, but like I said, we have to focus on the bigger image of everybody. And right now, we got to focus on the team, and we got to focus on the routine. And some of those athletes will very much feel neglected because they're not going full out. They're not getting to work on skills, or they're having to spot people when they're going, stuff like that. Um, those are common things, but I don't think that those are neglect. That's a priority and a time management issue. It sucks, and every coach finds ways to work around that and try to implement and include everybody, even when we're at portions where some people are being used. Um, I don't really think of that as a form of neglect, but now there are, like I said, it just makes no sense to me. Why would you take people that you don't want to work with? That you don't care about their growth, or you don't care about their development. Now, if someone comes in and they're being lazy, and you're like, I'm not even going to give them stuff because they're not going to do it anyway, that's a conversation to have. But like I said, if there's someone on your team that you just don't think that you can work with, you got to find a way to get rid of them. Just have a conversation with them, or be transparent with them, and the conversation has to happen. Like I said, if it's a personal thing, if it's you taking liberties, like, you have to remember that it's about the team, and doesn't matter who they like, doesn't matter what they do, as long as it's not destructive to your team. What people choose to do is what they choose to do. Like I said, if it doesn't have an impact on what goes on in the room, I don't feel like you can act and punish somebody for that. I don't feel like that can be neglectful. I don't feel like you should take people on your team and just sit them around and do nothing with them. There has to be an effort to do that. Like I said, it's a mind blowing thing, like just neglecting an athlete. Or, I see people give up on athletes a lot. They get frustrated with them, and they're just tired of working with them, and it's something that happens over the course of the season. They just kind of back off because they either lose faith in them, or they just don't feel like they can get through to them, and they just give up. And I've seen that happen, and I know that does happen quite a bit. But as far as doing that stuff off the bat, like, I just don't understand why you would take somebody that you don't think you can utilize, that you can't work with, or that you don't want to work with. I really don't understand why you would do that. Sometimes when stuff like that happens, I don't always think that it's intentional. I think that you get focused on certain things and you forget, and you might have an athlete or two that gets discouraged by that. But if you make it a point to have a conversation with them and listen to them when they come and bring those concerns to you, the stuff that we've already talked about, these things can be avoided. The negative perception or the false perception of them. But to say to neglect, or that people don't feel neglected, I think is a very false thing. And like I said, I know that it does happen. I know that it does take place. I just don't understand, like I said, why. But yeah, neglecting people, playing favorites on one, those things sometimes go hand in hand. Sometimes they're opposite of each other. Typically, I would think of them as probably concurring things. If you've got a favorite, you probably have someone that's not your favorite. But yeah, so those are definitely things for the athlete: the well-being, the motivation, how you inspire them, how you get them to do what you need to do, how you behave, how you conduct yourself with them. Those are things that obviously, like I said, if you're not transparent and you're not crystal clear about these are things where kids are just going to fill in the blanks. And then our last area that we're going to cover, and it's going to have some breakdown in it, is coaches' behavior, their ego. And a lot of this stuff is going to be ego-driven type stuff. You get to the point where you've success and you've done this and you've done that, and you just feel like you know what's right, and you're going to be at a battle with some people, because you're always going to have an athlete that's curious or has questions. And if your ego is too big that you can't tolerate that, then it's going to cause a problem. Or if you're not willing to listen, and being ego, getting too big for your britches, that can happen even to us. Getting overzealous, getting overconfident, backing off on that stuff, all that stuff, becoming prideful. That's a problem, because you limit what can improve your team. If you look at your team and you don't see anything that you can do to make them better, then you've gone as far as you can go, and you might as well tap out, because you've gotten stagnant. Growth and development are essential, but the bigger that your ego gets, the less likely you are, because you have so much confidence in yourself, confidence in your decision making, confidence in your ability to develop people. Or you come off, you win this year, and your ego and your head gets so big that you can't ever do anything. You don't want to listen to people. You don't want to have conversations. And, I think that there has to be like a check and balance. If you're an unchecked coach, which is Like typically, like one of the great things at McCracken is like we had the head coach, and we had three other assistants that were all chiming in, and we all different backgrounds and all different thoughts and all different opinions. And she would typically bring a question to us and be like, "Hey, is this right?" And if we all were in agreement on it, then it was unanimous, but we did that to make sure that we checked each other. Are we being right? Are we being authentic? And if you have a big ego, you're not willing to listen to stuff like that, and you alienate your coaching staff, and then of course you're going to alienate your team, and those, because if you're not going to listen to a grown man, you're not going to listen to a kid, especially. But I think that having coaching staff that you can rely and depend on is essential, and then having people that part of that reliability is being able to check you when maybe you're doing something wrong, or you're focusing on the wrong thing, or but if you're so closed-minded that you can't, or we're going to have a fight, then people are going to be less likely to speak up and have those conversations. And that's one of the great things I thought, when I was at McCracken's, that we were always in conversation, open. If they didn't agree with something that I said, they were more than happy to explain why. It never became a fight or an argument. It was just communication, and we addressed and worked together. We put all the ideas that I would see that they wouldn't, some that they'd see that I wouldn't, and we'd put it all on the table, and we'd figure out what was the best option based on what that was. And the only reason we did that is because we would check each other. Hey, if we're being too tough on this, we'd check each other. Hey, if this is too much, we'll check each other. If this is not enough, we'll check each other. All those things go into, but like I said, if your ego becomes so big and you lack that professionalism to have that work, then it's never gonna click. You might as well give it up, because you're never going to always be right. You're never going to know anything. You're never going to know everything. So you have to be ready to change on the fly. You have to be ready to take criticism. You have to be open to having your decisions questioned to a degree. Reasonably. Then we'll finish this up with a lack of boundaries. It is important for you as a coach to establish boundaries with your team. My mindset was, if it doesn't really affect the team, if it doesn't really affect morale, it doesn't matter. There's a personal life element to this that should not bleed over to some degree. I can't, I don't care who some kid voted for. I don't care who their family voted for. Doesn't matter to me. And even if I did know, it's not going to change the way that I affect. But there are certain boundaries. There's certain things that you can let people be a part of the conversation of. If you have to have a disciplinary talk with one person, that doesn't mean that you need to go and bring all the details out to everybody. It doesn't mean that you need to gossip with kids about other kids. It doesn't mean that you should gossip with parents about other parents, or parents about other people's kids. There has to be a level of professionalism there. There is a boundary and a line. There are things that we keep to ourselves. There are things that should be communicated out loud, and there are things that should not. There are opinions that should be kept to yourself. There are a ton of things, ways that you insert yourself in people's lives that you shouldn't do, and ways that you should. It's a fine line to walk, because I think, nobody wants to have people that reflect negatively on their team. And some people get too weird about that. People dedicate a lot of time to this and put a lot of energy and effort and take on a lot of responsibility and have a lot of pride in this. And they have a lot of pride in the people that they do it with and how that's done and the type of people there are. You can't concern yourself with some stuff. What people do in their individual life, like I said, if it's not negatively affecting my team, it's not negatively affecting that individual, then it doesn't matter. That's the end all be all. And you don't need to insert yourself anywhere else. You have to understand what you can and cannot communicate out loud. Like I said, you don't need to be trashing. We go back to that video that I was watching. They were sitting there just trashing that girl in front of everybody. One fat assistant coach turned around yelling at the other, "Oh yeah, she messed up," to all the parents. Like, fuck you. Like that's not, that's a violation of boundaries. You should never openly discourage a kid to a crowd of random people or people that they do know. It's stupid. It's unprofessional. It makes you look poor, and it makes you look like somebody I'd never want around my athletes. But like I said, that covers a wide net of what those boundaries be professionally, what you understand about them personally, what you know about them, what you need to keep confidential. There's a whole lot that goes. I mean, we could probably do like a whole episode on that alone. We're not going to, obviously, but yeah, establishing what your lack of boundaries are, what the boundaries with your team and you are. When can you push? When can you pull? There always has to be a fine line. There has to be a baseline. It has to be definitive. It has to be clear, and it has to be transparent. And if that's not established out there, then that's probably on you from a communication standpoint. And if somebody else doesn't care, then they probably need to go. Um, and then the lack of empathy is probably the best one. Um, you may have a kid come up to you and like, hey, we're cheering a game this week. And the kid's like, well, I've got this, this, and this. I've got the ACT. I've got prom or, homecoming. I've got the court. I've got all this. And you're like, well, you better be at the game at such and such time. You're not having a lot of empathy for them. Is it a big deal if one cheerleader misses cheering the homecoming game because they're going to be on the homecoming court and they need to get a dress? And it's not. That's one instance of, and if kids bring you a concern and you show no empathy and that you don't care, if they have a problem that's affecting them and you're just telling them to shrug it off and suck it up and go on, sometimes you have to be tough and you have to be, because if they're just being a baby about something, they're just being a baby. But when they're legitimately concerned, you'll be able to tell. You'll see the signs. And like I said, if you just don't care or act like it doesn't matter, you're wrong. There has to be a conversation. Even if it's a conversation to tell them that they're wrong or that you don't see it that way, you still have to have that conversation. And people want to feel like they're important. They want to feel like they're included. It's already hard enough to walk out here and feel like you're being judged from everybody and to have to overcome that and say that you're enough when your coach is sitting there and completely disregards everything that you say and everything that you feel, tells you that you're wrong and tells you that you're not right and that you should listen and that you just do what they say and that you're never going to get it right. If there's this constant negativity, you will become a mirror and you will reflect that onto other people. You will be negative all the time. You will get in your own head. And the list of things that can come from this are endless. It's burnout, it's fatigue, it's injury, it's mental blocks. All these things can be attributed from having a bad coach. It's really very, very simple. And I'll say this, and I think if you follow this rule, I think that you'll always be a good coach. If you focus on the little things, the big things will happen. If you focus on developing your athletes, the success will happen. When you make it the priority to make an athlete and a group of athletes better, to teach them better technique, to teach them how to perform better, to smile more, to be sharper, to be cleaner, to have good grips. When you develop them to do these things, success will come because success rewards the people that does the little things. So if you ever have that wonder, how can I be better? How can I be a better coach? It always comes down to how you develop your athletes. Because if you can develop great athletes and you develop enough great athletes and you develop enough great mindsets, you will develop great success naturally because other people can't do that. The athlete first, the success will come after that. Like I said, there's probably a whole lot of specific things that I can get into that would be really juicy and really great, but I don't know all of them. If you want to, feel free to leave comments to let me know. If you've had any kind of interactions with a bad coach in the past, send those to me, DM them to me, and I may read some of them on my next episode. I think on my next one, I'm going to look at some of the financial stuff and people getting priced out because stuff has become so ridiculously expensive. It's unbelievable. So we're going to take a deep dive into some of that. Please feel free to check out my other episodes. You don't have to watch them in any particular order. They're not chronological other than my timeline stuff, but you can view that how you want to. Thank you once again. Please continue to like, subscribe, share, retweet, repost, whatever you got to do to help me expand this. That would be fantastic. And I just want to thank you guys once again for all of your support. If you are listening here on YouTube, once again, you can follow me on TikTok at AttackOnAlex64. I post lots of videos promoting and growing and letting know when the next episodes will come out. So if that's something that you would like to do or you want some more of this content, please feel free to follow me. As we finish up the dark side of the cheer, we will start to segue in because the competition world is going to open up, and I'm going to, a lot of the UCA regionals, I'm going to hit those. I'm going to watch some of the state competitions, and I'm going to hit those and do a lot of reviews as we finish up and get into our run to nationals and stuff like that. So that'll be really exciting to get to do. I look forward to that. It's some fresh content that I won't know about until I see it. So I'm really excited to do some of that. So once again, thank you guys so much. I hope you enjoyed yourselves. I hope this was a great conversation and something for you to think on. And I will see you guys next time on Memoirs of the Father. Goodbye and good night.